Om Prithvi Shantirantariksha Shantir Dyav Shantir Disha Shantiravantara Disha Shantiragni Shantir Vayu Shantiraditya Shantish Chandrama Shantir Nakshatrani Shantirapa Shantiroshadaya Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Gau Shantiraja Shantirashva Shantir Purusha Shantir Brahma Shantir Brahmana Shantir Shantireva Shantir Shantir Me Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet, sarvastaratu durgani, sarvo bhadrani pashyatu, sarvas sadbuddhimapnotu, sarvas sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Satoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravirmayeti Rudrayatte Dakshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. So welcome everyone. Hope all of you have had good 5 weeks, as good as it is possible to have in these present circumstances. By this time we know that the pandemic through which we all are passing is going to be here for some time. It doesn't look like there is a quick and easy resolution for this. And the last few weeks and months, we see how quickly the world around us has changed. And along with the changes we see outside, our own daily lives have also changed. And it's not easy to keep up our spirits, not only when we see the increasing numbers of people who are being infected, the numbers that are dying because of this virus, while things seem to be more or less okay in some parts of the world, but in some other parts it's not that great. So there is that. As if that were not enough, we have alongside now, especially in the United States, we see heart-rending scenes of brutality by the law enforcement officers. There is the anguish and fear and the protests. Then there are the wildfires in several states on the West Coast. And this is in addition to the financial crunch that is being felt by many businesses, by and the layoffs and the job situation. It's like things are closing in on us from all fronts. And in the midst of all this, to ask ourselves, what is there to be hopeful about? Things look quite hopeless at many different levels, in many different ways. And many people have experienced that kind of helplessness and hopelessness in this situation. But many others have also have used this as an opportunity, or sometimes circumstances have forced them to look more inward and ask themselves some of the questions that in the busyness of our daily lives we may not have had an opportunity to ask before. Given the situation as it is in the world, what is my duty in these circumstances? What should I be doing where do my priorities lie? A little bit about this I had written in a blog a couple of weeks ago about what does the Gita have to say about my duties, what my duties are. And we had discussed this earlier, maybe a month or two before, when we discussed the ideal of Swadharma in the Gita. The situation as it stands now, we are forced to look outside and see things are not that great. And when we look inside, the time we spent looking at our inner life may be beneficial spiritually, because as I said, it may help us ask the kind of questions we may not have asked before. Like ultimately, what is the goal of life? What is the purpose of life? But then when we spend time looking inside, there is the other feeling that comes, that when there is so much going on outside, is it right for me to be looking only inside? Is my looking inside a selfish activity? Is it something that I'm doing to run away from the reality outside? All these kind of questions come up. And these are the kind of questions that are addressed in the Gita. The last time in the last class, we saw the early verses in chapter 5, when Krishna speaks about sannyasa, that what does renunciation really mean? And then in that context, we spoke about monastic life, that spiritual life is a life of detachment, but in some cases, that detachment may take a more formal form, and in many other cases, that detachment may be completely internal. And in the second verse of chapter 5, if you look at the second verse, the third verse, sorry. Neyasya nitya sannyasi yo na dveshti na kankshati nirdvandvo hi mahabaho sukham bandhat pramuchyate. What Krishna is saying here is that the two essential qualities we need for detachment are to be free from hatred and expectation. And we discussed a lot about that last time. Today I would like to draw your attention to two sets of verses. Verses 10, 11, 12, and 13 of chapter 5, which we will take a look at first, and then a second set of verses, 18, 19, and 20. So this is what we will briefly reflect on this morning. Let me read those verses. If you open your copies of the Gita, take a look at verse number 10. I will read the Sanskrit and then the translation in my book. I'm referring to Swami Swarupananda's translation, but you are free to look at any translation of the book that you have. Brahmanyadhaya karmani sangam tyaktva karoti yah lipyate nasapapena padmapatram bhasa. He who does actions forsaking attachment, resigning them to Brahman, is not soiled by evil, like unto a lotus leaf by water. Kayena manasa buddhya kevalairindriyairapi Yoginav karma kurvanti sangam tyaktvatma shuddhaye. Devotees in the path of work perform action only with body, mind, senses, and intellect, forsaking attachment for the purification of the heart. Yuktav karma phalam tyaktva shantim apnoti naishtikim ayuktav kamakarena phale sakto nipadhyate. The well-poised, forsaking the fruit of action, attains peace, born of steadfastness. The unbalanced one, led by desire, is bound by being attached to the fruit of action. Sarvakarmani manasa sanyasyaste sukham vashi navadvare pure dehi naiva kurvan nakarayan. The subduer of the senses, having renounced all actions by discrimination, rests happily in the city of the 9 gates, neither acting nor causing others to act. So this is the question that Krishna returns to again and again about work. He makes it clear that we don't have option about whether to work or not to work, because by their very nature, the body and mind, they are going to be indulging in activity. The mental activity is the kind of thinking, feeling, willing that we do, and the physical activity is every movement of the body. So none of us has any choice about whether to do things or not to do things. Where we do have a choice is what we should do and how we should do it. And that is what is being discussed in these 4 verses. So, one thing is very clear, that every activity I do with a sense of agency, by that I mean everything I feel that I am doing, then I feel responsible for my actions and I get the results of those actions as well. So if I do something knowing that I am doing it, then I'm attached to the result. I want that work to succeed. If the work succeeds, I'm happy. If the work does not succeed, I'm unhappy. If people criticize my work, I'm unhappy. If people praise me, I'm happy. And so I am affected by it. And in a more subtle way, it's not simply that my being affected by what people think of me, that is what creates bondage. But there is a greater bondage involved, and that is that every action will yield some result. That result could come in the form of praise and recognition in this world, but it can also come in the form of some kind of a reward, some kind of if it's a good work, I'll be rewarded. If not in this life, if I don't get the recognition and praise in this life, I'll get it in another life. Another life would mean a life after death. And we might say, well, what's the problem? If I do something good, I'll be rewarded for it, and that should be fine. Yes, it should be fine, except that the rewards are never eternal, because the work is not eternal. No matter what work I do, it's limited. And so the rewards are limited also. So if I become accustomed to a certain privilege, a certain happiness, but that happiness is time-bound, that happiness goes away, then oddly enough, it becomes a cause of further sorrow. It's a little bit like this. If I love ice cream, let's say, some particular kind of ice cream, and it's there right in front of me, and then, of course, I'm happy. As I eat it, I'm even more happy. And for some time, as long as that taste and that relish remains within me, I'm contented.
But then that effect is not going to last forever. Afterwards, I'm just going to say, oh, I wish there were more ice cream, and the stock is over. And then I'm going to be unhappy again. Or if I eat too much of it, and then I'm going to have some upset in my digestive system, and I'm going to be unhappy again. So all of the joy and sorrow that we experience in life is time-bound in this way. And that is why this work always becomes a challenge. And so this verse, the 10th verse points out that one way of trying to free ourselves from these negative results of action is by offering all the work to Brahmani. Brahmani here means the Lord. So those who have faith in God, a personal God, then just as we are willing to undertake any hardship, willing to undertake any difficulty for someone whom we love. So if, as a devotee, if I truly love God and believe that whichever situation in life I am in, God has put me there. Whatever work I'm called upon to do, I'm doing it out of love for God. Then my sense of agency gets out of the way. And that is how then I remain unaffected by these negative effects of work, the way a lotus leaf, although it is in water, remains untouched by water. You can see, not too many places you can get to see lotus, at least in New England, but you can see the water. It's in water. It's actually in water, and you put a few drops of water on it, they just kind of slip off. So in a similar way, we can be in the world, and we are in the world really, not that we have any choice about it, but the only way we can remain untouched by these negativities in the world is if we can find a way to do the work in this way. And so that is what verse number 10 points out. And what does this kind of work do? Verse 11 says, Atma Shuddhaye, it purifies the heart. So every work gives a result. If I do the work with the sense, with my ego strong that I'm doing it and wanting the result of the work, I will get it. So if I do good work, I will get good result. Oftentimes the general words for the result in the Gita and in elsewhere, the words are punya and papa. Now sometimes the word papa gets translated in English translation as sin, but that's probably not the best translation. All that we can say is punya means the positive results of a good work that's done, and papa is the negative results of the bad work that is done. And a positive result would mean anything that brings me joy in some form, either in this world or the next. And the negative effects, the papa would bring me some kind of a pain and suffering, either in this world or in the next. So when it says here, lipyate nasa papena, that's the word papa used here in verse 10, that such a person is not touched by evil. Now by evil here is not simply meant the suffering. And this is important to remember, that suffering is, of course, who wants suffering? Nobody wants suffering. But the doing good work and being rewarded for that in heaven, that is not so easy to know. That why would that be a suffering? And so here is something that I guess most of you already know, but it's good to kind of remind ourselves about it. And that is this, that at one level, yes, this is happiness and this is sorrow. And they are two different things. That this is good and that's bad. They are two different things. But there's also a very higher way, higher viewpoint by which these kind of distinctions we make between good and bad, distinction between happiness and sorrow, we see are done at a very relative level. That from a higher perspective, it's possible that what seems as joy and sorrow is just sorrow. It's a little bit like if I have now two kinds of chains. One is a gold chain and the other is a rusted iron chain. And see, we have to admit the two are different. One is gold chain and the other is a rusted iron chain. In no way we could say they are the same. But from another perspective, if I have two people and I tie up the hands and feet of one with the gold chain and tie up the hands and feet of another with the iron chain, as far as those people are concerned, it really makes no difference to them whether it's a gold chain or an iron chain, because both have ultimately lost their freedom. So it's possible that both are same from the perspective of freedom and bondage, because both are equal bondages. But from a relative standpoint, a gold chain is different from an iron chain. Now, exactly in the same way, while people may want to go to heaven and try to avoid hell, and that makes sense at one level, but from a higher perspective, going to heaven is not in any way less suffering than going to hell. I know this sounds odd, but from a spiritual standpoint, either way, whether I go to heaven or I go to hell, I am still a part of the samsara. I am still in bondage. I still am ignorant of my true nature. I still am kind of living in a dream. I haven't woken up yet. And if I have not woken up, I am still prone to all the limitations of a limited existence. And that is why whether I do good or whether I do bad, ultimately it is going to create bondage in me. Now, if I'm able to offer, first of all, I need to stop doing activities which are adharma, which are bad, which are evil, which are unethical, which are immoral. Because there is no way you can transcend that. You have to suffer for it. But if I'm able to eliminate all these unethical, immoral activities, both of body and mind, and then do only good, moral, ethical actions, always do what is right, always do what is good, and if I can do that without attachment, if I can do that only out of love for God, I can do that by saying, I'm just an instrument. Not just saying, actually feeling deep within that I just do this not wanting anything for myself, but I do it as an offering to the divine. If that's how I'm truly able to do it, then, as verse 11 says, Atma Shuddhaye, it goes to the purification of the heart. Now, what does purification of the heart really mean? It means that my mind acquires a clarity. And if my mind acquires that clarity, then I'll be able to see things more clearly. And if I see things more clearly, then I will be able to reach my destination without any accidents. It's like if I'm driving and the windshield of my car is become foggy and I can't see anything and I can't stop the car, then there's a real possibility that there's going to be an accident, the real possibility that I might go and hurt myself. But if the windshield is very clear, if I'm fully alert, if my car is in a working condition, then I just go straight to my destination. So now our car, our vehicle, is the body and mind. Now, these desires and ambitions and hatred and all of the negativities that we have, that's the one that are making the windshield of my mind very foggy. And I am not able to see. And I can't stop. As I said, non-activity is not an option. So my car is moving, I can't see things. And that's why I get hurt. That's why we say things in life that bring us pain. We do things in life that bring us pain. We think in a certain way that brings us pain. Because we all want to be happy. But because we are not seeing things clearly, we do things which are not in our interest. Now, if I can do everything without seeking any selfish gain thereby, if I can do everything as an offering to God, then it purifies my heart. And purification of heart, as I said, means it clears the windshield of my mind. Then I'm able to see things. And if I'm able to see clearly, I will know exactly what I should do in a given situation. Will know exactly how I should think, what I should say, and what I should do. And that's what in verse 12 then it says, the well-poised, forsaking the fruit of action, attains peace, born of steadfastness. That's what it gives us, that deep inner peace. When all the disturbances have gone, that clarity has come, and such a person then becomes free from all the negativities, the negative results of actions. And then finally, verse 13 says, once that state is reached, what does this person do? Having renounced all activities by discernment, rests happily in the city of the 9 gates. The city of the 9 gates is the human body, neither acting nor causing others to act. Now, doesn't mean the enlightened being just sits there doing nothing. Oftentimes, in fact, we see among these great enlightened people that in history, if you look at their lives, they were tremendous workers. They did so much. They accomplished so much in such a short amount of time. So it doesn't make sense to say, well, they don't do anything. Yeah, but the difference is this. While they did a lot, they did it without thinking that they did it. Their little I had completely merged in that big I. And so therefore, they did everything without doing everything. So they did a lot of good without doing a lot of good. That's a very Zen-like statement. And that's the ideal we have to move forward to. Can I continue doing what is right in life, continue doing what is good in life, without feeling that I am doing it? And the beauty is this, if I don't feel I have done it, I am unaffected by both praise as well as criticism, by rewards as well as the negative things. So if it is successful, well, the Lord be blessed. The Lord's grace was there. If it is a failure, well, you tried your best. So you remained unaffected like the lotus leaf in water. So that's the idea. So these 4 verses, 10, 11, 12, and 13, give us a good blueprint about the benefit of continuing to do what is right, continuing to do what is good, but trying to keep our little I out of the picture. Sri Ramakrishna called this little I the unripe I. And the ripe I, he said, is the I that is attached to God. The unripe I is the I that makes me attached to or identified with these little things. I am this, I am that, and all this egoistic statements and ways people express themselves. A big I would be an I that is attached to God, an identity which says, I'm a child of God, I'm a servant of God. Whichever way we are able to connect to that higher spiritual ideal. When that becomes a dominating identity, then all these other identities fall away by the side. And that ripe I that is attached with God, frees us, keeps us, or protects us from everything that really is troubling people, all of us, in our daily lives. And so the more I can merge my little I in the I of God, that God is mine, I am God's. And that's why a personal form of devotion, not as a form of strategy, something that comes naturally, is greatly beneficial in the practice of Karma Yoga. So this is the first set of verses I wanted to briefly reflect on this morning. And the second set of verses are verses 18, 19, and 20. So please take a look at those three verses. I'll again read them, and then we'll see quickly what is being taught here. Vidya vinaya sampanne brahmane gavihastiri shunichaiva shvapakecha pandita samadarshinaha. The knowers of the self look with an equal eye on a brahmana endowed with learning and humility, a cow, an elephant, a dog, and a pariah. Ihaivatai jitas sargo yesham samye sthitam manaha nirdosham hi samam brahma tasmad brahmanite sthitaha. Relative existence has been conquered by them even in this world, whose mind rests in evenness, since Brahman is even and is without imperfection. Therefore, they indeed rest in Brahman. Na prarushyet priyam prapya nodvijet prapya cha priyam sthirabuddhirasam mudho brahmavid brahmani sthitaha. Resting in Brahman with intellect steady and without delusion, the knower of Brahman neither rejoiceth on receiving what is pleasant, nor grieveth on receiving what is unpleasant. So once we are able to get our little I out of the way, we will see that all the distinctions that we make in life about higher and lower, or someone who is close to me or someone who is not close to me, all these distinctions will go away. One will be able to see everyone with an equal eye. Although this verse gives a few examples, a brahmana, a person who is filled with learning and humility, a cow, an elephant, a dog, and a pariah, just taken 4 or 5 things at random, that one would make no distinction. We make so many distinctions even between human beings. That's the tragedy of our life, along with all the wonders of human existence. The dark side of it is the distinctions we make between one person and another based on ancestry, on class, caste, color, race, religion, all of these different reasons why we keep on separating people and then say this is higher, this is lower, or these are my people and those are not. There is that very ancient verse which is beautiful, which says, Ayam nijaha parova iti ganana laghu chetasam udara charitanantu vasudhaiva kutumbakam. That people who are small-minded, whose hearts have shrunk, such are the people who make distinctions such as, oh, this is mine, these are our people, those are not our people. But those whose hearts have truly broadened, have truly expanded, then for them, everything becomes one. They do not make any distinction. The actual Sanskrit verse says, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the whole world becomes one family. I think it's good to kind of recognize, makes it an ideal family, because in many families, there are still distinctions. There are people who fight, people who quarrel. And so saying the whole world becomes one family doesn't seem to be such a wonderful thing in some ways. A family of 3 or 4 people, if they are quarreling all the time and are not able to live under the same roof peacefully, and to then say, if this is the situation with just 3 or 4 people, and if the family were like 3 or 4 billion people, it's going to be that much more chaos and unhappiness multiplied. And so the idea, of course, is that all these distinctions go away, and one begins to see everyone as our own. There's one verse here connected with this that I would like you to take a look, and that is verse number 15. Let's look at 14 and 15, because they are very connected here. Na kartrutvam na karmani lokasya srujati prabhuhu na karma phala sanyogam swabhavastu pravartate. Neither agency nor actions does the Lord create for the world, nor does he bring about the union with the fruit of action. It is universal ignorance that does it all. So here is this question. This ego that is within me, from where did this ego come? I mean, a simplistic way would be to say, well, God created everything. God created me. So God created the ego. That doesn't really help, because then it's like, well, if God created everything, then God created evil, and God created this, and then what can you do? Just allow things to remain as they are. So that's not really. So here what Krishna is saying is, now, I did not create this sense of agency, neither have I created this karma, nor have I brought about the connection between one who does the work and the karma itself. Then what? Then how does it all happen? And it's a very important phrase in the Gita, swabhavastu pravartate. And it's been translated here as is universal ignorance that does it all. It means it's the nature of things to, I think a better way to express that would be, it is the nature of things to happen. Things happen. Or I sometimes say, stuff happens. Now, to ask, like, why did this happen? Who did it? This person did it. This person should be punished for it. And all of these questions that we then connect with things that are happening, those are our creations. In fact, in this book called Panchadashi, it looks at it this way. It says that there are 2 kinds of creations. One is God's creation. It's called Ishvara Srishti. And then our creation, called Jiva Srishti. And the distinction is simply this, that the trees and mountains and sky and everything, well, God created all of that. But now, if I look at the tree and then say, oh, this is a beautiful tree, I love it. Now, ascribing beauty to that tree, that's my creation. Or if I say, oh, this tree is terrible, that's my creation. So it's possible to look at these, the whole idea of creation also in many different ways. There is no one definitive answer to this. There are just different ways of looking at it. So verse number 15 then points out that all this idea about merit or demerit, papa and punya, the good results and the bad results. And Krishna says, I'm unattached to both of them. And here, we have seen this before, that every time Krishna uses the word, the first person pronoun, I, it's not this historical Krishna, but this I means the spirit. The I that is the self that is separate from the body and mind. So the Atman is not affected by papa or punya. What is affected are the body and mind. Because papa and punya, the merit and demerit, the results of actions are material things. And because they are material things, they affect only material entities. They don't affect the Atman. And that is what Krishna is saying here. So sometimes when we pray to God and say, God, take away all these things, who are we really praying to? Those are the kind of questions then they get asked in Jnana Yoga. And the second line in verse 15 says, knowledge is enveloped in ignorance, hence do beings get deluded. The idea is, if everything is one, then at some point that oneness was broken, oneness disappeared, and in its place many came. Why did the one become the many? Simply because of ignorance. When I go to sleep, when I'm in my bed, I'm just by myself. But when I sleep and in my dream, suddenly this whole world appears. So this one person who goes to sleep then creates the many in the dream. Now, the reality is only this one person who is asleep. But from that one person who is asleep, the one person who has forgotten their waking identity, that ignorance of the waking identity gives rise to the dream. And so it's possible to look at this entire creation, including what's happening now, what had happened 50 years ago or thousands of years ago, all of this idea of past, present, and future, all of our experiences to be seen as everything becomes possible because somebody is asleep and that somebody is dreaming, and that somebody is me. So none of these ideas these are like different ways of looking at it. So when we think about dream and all of that, it's usually the people who try to look at our experiences from the perspective from knowledge, Jnana Yoga, look at it, try to employ the understanding through the dream analogy. The paths of Bhakti Yoga, they try to look upon it as me being a servant of God and doing things out of love for God. Either way, neither of these ways is better or less, not better. Both are equally good. But the ultimate result, whether we do it in this way or the other way, the ultimate result is the little I, the unripe I, gets out of the way. And when it gets out of the way, we stand face to face with that reality. And that is where then all contradictions disappear. Right now, there are lots of contradictions. There is this I and the world. Then there is this conflict between the good and bad, the idea between heaven and hell, and so on. Now, all of these contradictions, we can try to answer them, but there is no perfect answer because the problem itself is not perfect. So an imperfect problem will have an imperfect answer. We cannot solve the problem fully, but we can dissolve the problem. So one of our Swamis used to say that if I'm being chased by a lion in a deep forest and I'm running for my life and the lion is chasing me and I run and run and run and the lion keeps on chasing me, and then suddenly I wake up and it turns out that I was dreaming all along. Now, the lion chasing me was a problem. It was a big problem. It was a life and death situation for me. Has that problem been solved? You can't say it's been solved. I don't know what happened to the lion. I don't know whether the lion succeeded in getting me because in between, the whole thing stopped. So what the Swami said was, the whole problem was dissolved. The lion disappeared. The one who was running away from the lion disappeared. The whole situation disappeared. So that was happened. Whether we follow the path of bhakti or we follow the path of jnana, neither of these really solve the problem, but both of these will dissolve the problem. So these are some of the ideas that come in this later section of chapter 5. So we'll take a short break now, about 5 minutes. And then if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comment section. And then we will take a look at those questions. Om Jananim Saratam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhur Muhuhu. All right, let's take a look at some of the questions. Having the faith that all the work we do is for the love of God, how should one handle the negative emotions that come with the negative result of work in reality? Do the negative emotions not come at all in an ideal state? If I'm doing the work truly out of love for God, then negative emotions, I'm not very sure what exactly you mean by negative emotion, but they should not really come. If negative emotions do come, it means that I'm doing the work out of love for God, but alongside there is love for a few other things as well. Because if it is done completely out of love for God, then one would do it as best they could. Success is not guaranteed. The work can still fail. But if I have done it out of love, using my best knowledge and trying really hard without holding back, with complete care and attention, then even if the work fails, one is not going to be happy if the work fails, but there will not be negative emotions. One will at least have the satisfaction that I did the best I could. I couldn't have done anything differently. I couldn't have done anything better at that moment, since I gave my best. And so I don't think there would be negative emotions if my love for God is complete while I was doing that activity. Is the ripe I Atman? No, it's not I as in E-Y-E. It's in ripe I as in I. The ego I. So the ripe I is meant the I that is connected with God. So a ripe I is still ego, but ego that is connected with the infinite rather than the ego that is connected with any material things or material achievements. So it's not the Atman, but it is the kind of ego that will take me towards the Atman. It's a kind of ego that is able to transcend itself. But the unripe I cannot transcend itself. Unripe I can only give me more suffering. If we continue in life without feeling I have done it, would that mean not taking ownership of that task? If we made a mistake, not to own it. Well, if we are free to take ownership of all the tasks, but along with ownership will come both the positives and the negatives connected with it. But if I've done it out of love for God, seeing that God, I'm only an instrument, then I do not take ownership of it. Which is easy to say, but those who have tried to practice it know the difficulties involved. Because when we do something, if people praise us for it, that's great. Who wants to not accept the praise? It's only this condemnation or criticism that we don't want. So not taking ownership would mean to not be affected by praise, but also by blame. And then a devotee's thinking is this, that if a work turns out to be successful, a bhakta automatically thinks that this has happened due to the grace of God. But if the work is not successful, or if I mess it up somehow, then a bhakta will say, I failed. I didn't do it as well as I should have. I mean, logically one should be able to say, well, if it failed, well, it's God's work, God failed. But that's not how a bhakta will think. Can a worldly person renounce the sense of doership too? No. A worldly person cannot renounce the sense of doership, because if the worldly person does renounce the sense of doership, that person will no more be worldly. So it's a contradiction. If I'm worldly, then I cannot give up that sense of doership. But if I'm able to give up the sense of doership, then I'm not worldly anymore. And the question continues, I am a student. If it is my goal to crack an exam and get a job, how do I renounce the sense of doership or convert it into karma yoga? Well, if I'm a student, then my goal really is to excel at every stage of my life. And as a student, my duty is to study and do as well as I can. And if I do as well as I can, then I will be rewarded for my talents, for my knowledge, and so on. What, as a student, I can try to remind myself is that the energy I have to do my studies or to do any work, the knowledge and the talents that I have all come through God's grace. So even if I do well in my exams, even if I land with a perfect job, if my eye is connected with God, I will say all of these things have become possible through God's grace. If I am truly able to say that from the bottom of my heart, then that sense of doership, I'll be free from it. And so that's important to remember. Does everything look good to a pure mind? Everything looks pure to a pure mind. There is a story in the Mahabharata in which it was said that Krishna asked Yudhishthira, the eldest of the Pandavas, to go and find the worst person, the most evil-minded person in the world. Said, I'll give you 3 days, look around and then tell me who is the most evil person you met in your life. And the same question was given to Duryodhana, the eldest of the Kauravas, saying, go and find the truly good human being that you have met. In the 3 days, look around and show me which was the best good person you met. And the story goes on to say, after 3 days, both return. And Yudhishthira says, I looked everywhere and could not find anybody bad. Everyone is good. And Duryodhana came and said, I looked everywhere. All are terrible people. Nobody is good. The moral of the story is that we always find outside what is there in a germ form, in a seed form inside our own heart. So if I see evil outside, there is some potentiality of evil in my own heart. If my inner being is filled only with the divine, if my inner being is filled only with God, then wherever I see, I will see only God. there's a nice example Swami Vivekananda gives in his lectures on Dhyana Yoga. And he says this, that suppose there is a bag of gold on a table filled with gold, and I know that there is gold in it, and I'm in another room, and maybe there is a camera, security camera, and I'm monitoring that place. And then suddenly I find a person entering into that room, look here suspiciously here and there, sneak up to that bag and pick it up and start leaving the room. I'm just going to call 911. I'm going to say, here is a thief. Catch the thief. And then Swami Vivekananda, in that example, points out, suppose there's a little baby in that room who also sees this person enter inside, pick up the bag of gold and leave, and the baby is not agitated at all. Now, the example is given to show that I am able to see the thief outside, because in a very subtle form, that thief is inside me. That is why I'm able to see a thief, because otherwise, I cannot say in the same breath, God pervades everyone and everything, and then say, oh, here is a thief, catch the fellow. Because I should have seen God there. But instead of seeing the all-pervading presence of the divine, I'm seeing, first of all, instead of seeing a divine being, I'm seeing a human being. And not only a human being, I'm seeing a thief there. So it's my fault, it's my mistake. I have this potentiality of the thief in my heart, which is why I'm seeing it. But the little baby in that example is not able to see thief outside, because at that stage, well, whether after the baby grows up, maybe you might see the thief. But at that stage of the baby's life, there is no thief present in it. It's the baby. So we see outside what we are inside. And that's why when sometimes people complain about the world, how terrible this world is, how everyone is selfish, how everyone is bad. And then we could say, okay, wait a minute. What are you doing in this world which is so selfish and bad and evil? If that's what you are seeing everywhere, you must be that also. So that's the kind of a way in Vedanta these topics are thought about. Without grace, this ignorance cannot be eliminated, however hard we might try. Is that true? Yes, that is true. And it's also true that, yes, the different yogas that we practice, all the different spiritual practices that exist, all are meant to make us fit to receive that grace. Now, grace is not something that comes and goes. Sri Ramakrishna gave the example of a breeze. So he said, just as the breeze is always blowing, we need to hoist our sails to catch the breeze so the boat can move. So similarly, God's grace is always available. But I need to make myself fit to receive that grace. I need to have a container in which that grace can be kept and preserved. And so that's what we need to do. But God's grace is always present. That's true. And without that grace, ignorance cannot go. Could you please expound on the Panchadashi line, what will happen, etc.? And keeping this in mind, also tell us how to avoid the danger of fatalism. Yeah, the Panchadashi shloka is one of the favorite verses of mine. It goes like this. Yata bhavi natad bhavi, bhavi chet natad anyatha, iti chinta vishagnoyam bodho, brahma nivartakaha. Which means that if something is going to happen, it will happen. If something will not happen, it will not happen. Knowing this, wise ones become free from the poison of anxiety and free from all delusion. Now, this is not fatalism in the sense. This doesn't mean that I just don't do anything. What this verse asks us to do is that in every situation, I should do what is right. I should do what is good. So having done my duty, having carried out my responsibility as best I can in every situation in life, after having done that, I have to recognize that my part, I have done everything that was humanly possible. And now, what will happen will happen. What will not happen will not happen. Because there is really nothing more to be done after you have done everything that was possible for you. And so, at that moment, that acceptance should arise in the heart, that whatever was possible for me, from my side I have done. Now, there are factors and forces beyond my control. They control the outcome of the event. And so it's a very helpful verse, because all of our anxiety in life, the verse calls it the poison of anxiety. All of our anxiety comes over things over which we don't have control. Because over things we have control over, we should do our best. But things beyond our control, being anxious about it doesn't help, because it only robs us of our peace of mind. Being anxious about anything doesn't solve any problem in life. How does the person with same-sightedness still able to feel and express emotions? Is it like participating in a play? Well, we could say yes, it is like participating in a play, but it's not. It's like being a good actor, but never forgetting that I am the actor. Sometimes some of these good actors in a play, when they are enacting a role, they pour themselves. They forget their identity and become one with that character. So the emotions that are expressed are real. But they also have enough control to know that when the play ends, or whenever they are tired of it, to know, well, this is just a role that I am playing. So feeling emotions themselves are actually a good thing. I mean, emotions are a very powerful force within us. When these emotions are purified, these emotions themselves can take us to God, give us a vision of God. So to have emotions is good, but the emotions should be pure, purified. That's what Bhakti Yoga does. Bhakti Yoga is a way of purifying our emotions. Just like Jnana Yoga is a way of purifying our power of reason. And Karma Yoga and Raja Yoga purify our willpower. So all these four yogas can be seen as different ways of purifying the powers of the mind. So long as emotions don't overwhelm me, I think they can be very, very powerful and very helpful. Today we made a distinction between God's creation and our creation. Example, tree and the perception of tree's beauty. But are not all of our creations also God's creation? Yes, indeed. Everything is created by God. I was just referring to these two creations as one way we can try to understand what's happening around us. And that way of these two creations, Ishvara Srishti and Jiva Srishti, it is called, the creation of God and the creation of Jivas, is discussed in this book called Panchadashi. And yes, ultimately, speaking of ultimately, Vedanta would say there is really no creation at all. So, I mean, that's the whole idea. Everything depends so much on one viewpoint. From one viewpoint, there is no creation. And so there is no question of the creation disappearing. Another viewpoint is God created everything. And then through God's grace, it will go back. A third way is God's creation, our creation. None of these are ultimate truths. all of these are ways and concepts that we try to understand the world around us. So if the idea of God's creation and our creation is not something that resonates with us, we can just leave it because it's not absolutely necessary. Now that we are here in this world, how can we make sure our journey is incremental and leading us always in the direction of progress? One way to do that for a devotee of God would be to make sure that I have certain values and principles in my life, and whatever I do, I remain true to my own values and true to my principles. I always do what is right and what is good. And if we have sometimes doubt about what I should do or what I should not do, we can oftentimes get guidance from the Gita, guidance from our elders, guidance from a part of the tradition we might belong to. But most of the time, just good common sense is enough to know what is the right thing to do. And holding on to dharma as virtue. A person who holds on to these basic qualities of unselfishness, kindness, forgiveness, absence of jealousy, absence of hatred, so long as I have these basic qualities, most questions in life can be answered through common sense. But there will be a few things I may not know what to do, and oftentimes help of scriptures or help of those elders in our life whose judgment we trust, we can take their help. The story about the baby not seeing the thief, does this imply that if we see a thief or a murderer in action, that we should be like the baby and not interfere? Oh, no, that's not what is implied. If I see a thief, then I should deal with the thief as thieves need to be dealt with. If I don't see a thief, that's because the baby, it's not like baby seeing a thief but not doing anything. Baby just not seeing the thief. And so I have to find a way of recognizing, yes, if there is a thief, then that thief needs to be dealt with as a thief. But even when I see that thief, if a part of me can remind myself, yes, here is this divine being who is now taken the form of a thief. And the best way of worshipping the divine in the form of thief is to call the divine in the form of the corpse, and then let the divine corpse deal with the divine thief. Now this might sound very funny and flippant, but the idea is no matter what I see outside of me, I have to remember that it's really, if everything is filled with God, then God is present in everyone and everything. But the way I deal with God in these different forms will be different. So when I go to a place of worship and I see the deity on an altar, there is a way of recognizing the divine on that altar and adoring it and worshiping it. But if I'm a physician or a doctor and I have people who are suffering, my patients come to see me, I can still see that, well, here is this divine who has come to me in the form of the patient. Now the way I worship this divine will be different than the way I worship divine in a place of worship. So as a doctor, I can use my knowledge, my talent, my expertise to try to remove the suffering from this apparently suffering divine. If I'm a teacher, then God might come to me in the form of my students. And the way to worship that God would be to teach to give education. So it's possible to see God everywhere and in everyone, but the way of interacting with that divine would be different. That's the idea. How do we make ourselves available for God's grace? How to cultivate patrata, fitness in us? The more we become transparent, one of the verses that we saw today was about Chitta Shuddhi, purifying of the heart. So the more I'm able to make myself unselfish, kind, loving, the more I remove hatred, anger from my heart, that's the way I make myself fit to not just receive God's grace, but to recognize that God's grace is here right now, present around me, and I will be able to access it if I purify my heart. So that's the way to do it. So we come to the end of these questions today. Thank you for all the questions, and we will continue the study of the Gita in this way going forward, the way we did before the recess. So next week when we meet, we will undertake some of the themes that occur in chapter 6 of the Gita. Let's conclude with a prayer now. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Aura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto